Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Conversations from Stritch. My name is Dave Livingston, president of Lewis University, and I'm joined by Dr. Christopher Sint, our provost, for another episode. And I'm not going to take much time today to do much intro because we really have a lot that we want to talk about today. We're excited about our guests. I do want to congratulate again our students, faculty, and staff for another what I consider really good week under very trying circumstances. I know everybody's working incredibly hard, and we continue to make progress towards the end of the semester. So thank you for all the great work. All of us, I think, have been consumed by the issues of the election, and so many of you may remember that a couple weeks ago we invited Dr. Steve Nawara onto our show, and we've invited him back as a guest to just do a little debrief on the election. And so, Chris, I don't know if you want to do any more intro to that, but I know Steve is here with us this afternoon, and we can talk a little bit about the election.
No, I don't think we really need to do much more introduction. Hello, everyone. Great to be with you. And I would love, after we talk with Professor Nawara a little bit, we'll invite Associate Provost and Dr. Rapp to come on and share some of the results of our student and faculty surveys in relationship to this semester's educational experience, give some COVID-19 updates and so on. But first, I just am really glad that Professor Nawara is back with us. I think it's his third time.
Yeah, I think it is.
You have the record. Yeah. We'll give you a little break maybe after
You're
this.
becoming one of those guests on one of the cable news channels, Steve. But
Yeah.
Can you just give us your basic, I don't know, just kind of where are we and where are we going over the next 48 to 72 hours?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the election, it's been quite a ride for anybody that's been following the news. Right now, the presidential election still hasn't been called. There's been a tremendous amount of mail-in voting in this race. So as it stands now, neither candidate has officially been projected to reach 270 electoral votes, which are needed to win the presidency. I'm hearing, kind of chatter among the people that know things like this online that we're expected to see a lot more clarity in the next, 24 to 48 hours as all the mail ballots in Pennsylvania are begin to be counted or continue to be counted. But right now, as you can see on that map, there's several states that are still not yet called. The most important of those is Pennsylvania, which has 20 electoral votes. If Pennsylvania ends up going to Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. But even if that doesn't happen, there are other routes and other combinations that could get filled in, between Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and even North Carolina and Alaska, which I'm sure are probably going to lean towards President Trump. So there's still some uncertainty, in terms of the vote. But just as it stands now, all the ballots have been cast. It's just a matter now of processing them, making sure that the signatures on the mail ballots match the records, and then adding them up.
So Steve, could you talk a little bit about, you talked about all the mail-in ballots. Could you just talk a little bit about this distinction between day of voting? There was mail-in ballots, there were drop boxes, there were people who voted the day of in person in a booth, and then there were also people who voted the day of with a mail-in ballot that they dropped off. And all of these had slightly different, constituents or leanings because of different behaviors. Maybe you could try to explain to the audience what's going on there.
There's a lot of different ways to vote in this country, depending on what state you live in. You can vote by mail, you can vote early in person, and you can show up on election day and vote. And I would put the drop boxes as just a subset of the vote by mail. But even complicating that, you have 51 different election authorities. We have 50 states plus the District of Columbia, and each of those election authorities, which are usually secretaries of state's offices, they get to set the rules about how those ballots are processed and the order in which the votes are tabulated. Normally, in an election, it doesn't really make much of a difference. In past elections, Republicans and Democrats were no more likely to vote by mail or vote in person than, the other party. However, in this election, we've had a very unique scenario during the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen a pattern of, over the past several months of the President of the United States, a Republican, encouraging people not to vote by mail, explicitly, denigrating that as a method of voting and encouraging people to vote in person. On the other side of the aisle, Joe Biden's campaign was actively encouraging their supporters to cast a ballot by mail in order to reduce the possibility of COVID transmission, throughout most of the summer and into the fall. So what we ended up with was a gigantic split between the ballots that were cast on election day, which went overwhelmingly towards President Trump by like a 2-to-1 margin, versus the ballots that were cast in advance by mail, which have been going to Joe Biden, something like 70-30 nationwide. We don't know the exact numbers as it stands now, but the vast majority of the vote by mail are coming up for Biden. So it doesn't matter in terms of the count. Each is counted the same, but the order in which the ballots are tabulated does matter in that sense, right? So some states added up their early vote and absentee vote by mail early and added it in right away at the beginning of the night on election night. Other states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, they were prevented by state law from processing their mail ballots until after the election, or at least election day in some of those cases. So states like Pennsylvania are dealing with a backlog of what was millions of ballots, and there's still hundreds of thousands left that still need to be counted. And as a result, you're getting different dynamics, because in the states that showed the absentee voting first, you saw Democrats jump out to large leads, like in Ohio. And then over the night, as the in-person voting trickled in, it became more and more competitive. And then eventually Donald Trump won Ohio. In the opposite, you see a state like Michigan, which counted their in-person voting first. Donald Trump jumped out to a very large lead in Michigan, but then once all the vote by mail got added in, Joe Biden ends up winning that state fairly comfortably.
So, Steve, let me ask you. So that's such a great explanation and a good reminder of something I know I did not listen to the advice very well about being patient and waiting until the votes were counted. And so you said we'll probably find a call. It's the call on the election will be made in the next 24 to 48 hours. Let me ask you about something. A similar or related type of patience. So there some of these races in the states are very close, and there may be recounts in them, and then there will be lawsuits for sure in many of them, or some of them. And I just wonder if you could give us a little bit of a sense of what to expect over the next, even after the race is called, what might we expect over the next month or so?
Yeah, and just to clarify, I have no inside information about when a race will be called.
We stipulate that.
Just reading reports about when these ballots are expected to be finalized and counted. For example, in Pennsylvania, the Secretary of State's office today suggested that most of the ballots would be counted tonight or into the evening, overnight. And so if Joe Biden wins Pennsylvania, that's over 270 electoral votes and the election's over. However, let's say Donald Trump ends up holding on to a lead in Pennsylvania. We might not get a final call. In that case, you might end up having to wait until the ballots are processed in Nevada tomorrow or Arizona. Mm-hmm. Georgia looks like it's headed to recount territory no matter what. There's less than a 10,000 vote difference right there. And North Carolina, for instance, they specifically won't be updating their numbers for another week or so, because they're one of the states where when you cast a ballot, as long as it's postmarked by election day, as long as it arrives within a certain, I think it's 10 or 14 day deadline, it would still count. So there's still it's just a matter of waiting on North Carolina. In terms of legal challenges and things like that, it's hard to predict the future, but in terms of what I would consider credible news sources, I haven't seen any widespread or any real evidence of anything that would suggest a long and protracted fight. I could be wrong about that. It could be the case that the race really does come down to whether or not, for instance, ballots that arrive after Election Day, but were postmarked before Election Day in Pennsylvania count. That's something that could go to the courts. But as it stands now, a lot of the lawsuits that have been filed by specifically the Trump administration, a lot of them are getting dismissed fairly quickly by the federal courts.
That's great. So we did have a
that
question.
Could change at any time, of course.
We did have a question that came in. I know that at least the last number I saw, it was approaching a $4 million vote gap in terms of the popular vote. I think it was 3.85 or something like that of Vice President Biden over President Trump. But of course, that's not the rules of the game in the United States. It's about the Electoral College. We had received a question from a faculty member asking, and obviously this is there's a tone to this, but I'll just ask the question as it was asked, which is, when are we going to get rid of the Electoral College? But maybe you could, I know you did this a couple weeks ago for us, but in just a couple minutes, I don't know if it's possible in a couple minutes, but to talk about kind of who benefits from the Electoral College and, who would quote unquote benefit from a popular vote, just a pure tally of just everybody who votes, and how that plays into the possibility, as opposed to asking when are we going to get rid of it, what would it take to get rid of it in the sense of the politics of the United States?
Yeah, I can answer that part first, but that's the easy one. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. And the reason why has probably nothing to do about the popularity of the Electoral College. It polls consistently as an unpopular institution. But in order to change the Constitution of the United States, you need 3/4 of the states to ratify an amendment. And because the Electoral College disproportionately benefits smaller states, there's really no indication that a lot of the smaller states, I'm thinking of your Montanas and your Wyomings and your Dakotas and your Delawares, they're not going to want to surrender that extra power because the way the electoral votes are allocated across the states, each state gets 2 electoral votes for their 2 senators and then 1 electoral vote for every member of the House of Representatives. So that guarantees every state 3 electors, because every state has 2 senators and at least 1 representative. And then as the state gets larger and larger, they get more electors because they have more representatives. Like California has 55 electoral votes. And so you might think on the face of it, well, that benefits the larger states. However, there's a lot of states in this country that wouldn't deserve 3 electoral votes and 3 members in Congress if everything was divided exactly by population. And so you end up with scenarios like a voter in Wyoming, there's 1 elector per, I think, 195,000 people in Wyoming or something to that effect. Meanwhile, in Dr. Sint's former state of California, there's 1 elector per about 800,000 people, give or take, a couple dozen thousand. So you end up with this situation where the larger states are, the vote of an individual in the larger states is worth a lot less than the vote of an individual in a small state.
So
and so there's probably just no political appetite to change it.
Right. So, I mean, part of what you're saying is it may never change because there's enough small states that they represent more than 25% of the total number of states, and therefore
Yes.
they could, there's no reason for them. They would be voting against their own self-interest as a democratic people, right?
Yeah.
And most people aren't going to do that.
There's 2 exceptions. That's a really good way to phrase it. People usually don't vote against their own self-interest, and I wouldn't expect a state to do that either. But I think there are 2 possible exceptions to this that that might change the dynamics. Throughout our history, it's always been the Democratic Party that's lost the Electoral College when winning the popular vote. In recent memory, we've had, 2 elections since the year 2000 that went that way, where George W. Bush won the Electoral College but lost the popular vote, and then most recently in 2016 with Trump. I could imagine the dynamics of that changing if, let's say, in 2024, Joe Biden ekes out a popular vote victory despite ekes out an Electoral College victory despite losing the popular vote, or something like that. If suddenly the Republicans get stung by it in short succession after a Democrat's been stung by it, maybe then you end up with something budging. The other opportunity is something called the National Popular Vote Compact, or the National Interstate Popular Vote Compact. It's an agreement that's being made by a bunch of states. Colorado just ratified this on Tuesday, where individual states agree to put in their laws that they will award their state's electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. So regardless of what happens in a particular state, a state's going to send the electors pledged to the winner of the popular vote, and that this compact, this agreement, would only go into effect if a majority of this electoral college is represented by the state. So if states representing 270 electoral votes or more join into this agreement, then it goes into effect. Illinois has joined this agreement, for instance, but they're still not quite close enough to put that into effect. And even if it does go into effect, I could imagine legal wrangling and maybe court challenges about it. But it would be a way to get around the electoral college as it's set up now without amending the Constitution.
So is another way to get around it, Steve? I've been interested in Maine and Nebraska because they dole out their electoral by district, so to speak, within their state. So Omaha went for Biden. That could make a difference in this election, right?
Yeah, that could be very much what puts
it could have been a tie potentially in that one electoral vote. So is there anything you know about? I didn't know about this interstate agreement, but in terms of different individual states having grassroots movements within their state to say, we'd rather have our electoral college votes be split based on what our people in our state, and it wouldn't be an exact representation of one vote, one person, but it would be closer. For instance, if Pennsylvania did this right now, it would be over potentially, right? Because Pennsylvania would split, and that would, give half those votes, and then it would likely end.
Possibly. So the one possibility of that would be that, it would allow a more proportional representation of how the electoral votes are awarded within a state. But another caution against those types of laws are that it would ramp up the incentive to gerrymander your congressional districts dramatically, because the congressional district lines are drawn every 10 years after a census by the state legislatures. So there would be nothing to stop a state like Illinois that's controlled by Democrats from drawing all of the congressional boundaries to make it so that as many Democrats as many electoral votes as possible would go to Democrats. Yeah. And a state like Texas that's controlled by Republicans would do the same thing. So it could end up having almost a reverse effect where you end up, making the presidential election a lot like the House of Representatives, where there's just so many uncompetitive seats. There'd be a lot of uncompetitive districts. Yeah. Nebraska and Maine are kind of exceptions because they're smaller states. It's a little bit harder to gerrymander because they don't have as many, diverse urban centers that they can pick apart.
So Steve, we've had a couple more questions come in, and I'm going to maybe ask one is a fairly, well, all of these are complex questions, but a fairly straightforward question about runoffs. Is there an easy way to explain why it's decided to do a runoff or not decided to do a runoff in the presidential election or in the Senate race?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Georgia is the only state that still has runoffs. I'm not I would defer maybe to some of our colleagues in history about this, but I believe runoffs have kind of a dark history in the South because they were, designed basically to ensure that, African American voters would have a chance to have their selections overturned by a white majority. But Georgia still does have a runoff, and their laws are basically saying that if you don't get 50% in a congressional race in your, at least at the Senate level, I'm pretty sure it happens at the House too. It happens for governors, certainly. If you don't get above 50%, they do a second election where just the top two candidates face off against each other. And so that's probably going to happen with both of the Senate seats that were up for election this year, that there'll probably be a runoff in early January for both the regular Senate election in Georgia as well as a special election that was held. And for example, in the special election, there were like 5 or 6 pretty major candidates running. Some of them were Republicans, some of them were Democrats. And what you ended up with happening is, the top vote getter was a Democrat, and the second highest vote getter was a Republican. So those two are going to face off in January. And the same thing's probably going to happen with the other Senate race, where there's a Libertarian candidate that pulled away about 3 or 4% of the votes. So that's something that state legislatures are free to do, but I believe Georgia's the only one that does it. It was more common in the South in the early 20th century, though.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And then we have another question from a student. And the question is, can you recommend a good, unbiased news agency to follow for information, probably around voting in general, but the question's probably about how to track things now as well.
Yeah, I don't think, I don't know, this is more complicated than a question than it seems, because bias is something that's going to occur all the time, right? Everyone has a bias. What you're really looking for in a news agency, in a news source, is objectivity. Something that it allows the journalists to set aside their personal biases and report objective, factual, truthful information according to a kind of almost like a preset standard. There's a lot of reliable news sources out there. I know, for example, the students at Lewis University can get free subscriptions to the Wall Street Journal through the resources tab on My Lewis. You go to My Lewis, click on resources. There's a link to the Wall Street Journal. That's a really reputable newspaper. I wouldn't call them unbiased necessarily. Their editorial page is quite conservative. They come at the news from a conservative direction, but their news side, the journalists working there and the news content, not the editorial content, the news content is quite objective. The Washington Post, you can get discount subscriptions if you have an Amazon Prime account. That's another, good news source out there. The New York Times, certainly. If you want an international perspective, the BBC often comes at American news from an international perspective, and they don't have the partisan ties that you might get in an American source. I would tell that student probably to stay away from cable news in just about every variety. Each of the cable networks seem to have picked a side over the past couple decades. I hopefully that is some information. I think PBS does a really good job too at presenting objective news.
So I think we're going to take maybe one more question, and then we're going to move on to the second half of our show. And that's, I think, can be quick, Steve. So is it a preference, or is it a kind of, something that is, I don't know, legal or something like that, in terms of why only the two candidates debate when there is a third party candidate for president? So they mentioned Joe Jorgensen that, oftentimes got 1 or 2%, but was not on the debate stage. Yeah,
so those debates are not something that's written into any law. They are just set up by a group called the Commission for Presidential Debates. It's a group of just kind of like established partisans, half Republican, half Democrat, that get together and they plan the presidential debates. And the only reason that, they get to pick who's on the stage is because nobody else listens to them. Nobody else has done it, and nobody else has set anything up. So it's something that could change at any time if somebody else wanted to set up a presidential debate and could get the two major candidates to participate along with minor party candidates. There's nothing stopping that from happening.
And for our
I will
students
say,
who
though,
maybe weren't alive, it has happened in the past. Ross Perot was on
Yeah.
that stage
Yeah.
10 years ago, 12 years ago. I don't remember which election that was.
It was
Well, it has
Longer
to be
than
12
that.
years ago, 16.
Yeah,
All right, I'm
it
getting
it
old.
was 24
All right,
years ago.
I'm showing my age. All right, so
Yeah.
thank you, Steve.
Well, I just want to say
yeah.
I mean, this is just more of a comment, Steve, but before you go, I feel like I've been a professor and administrator for a long time, and I've never seen so much student excitement and engagement and interest in an election before. And I just want to say it's been really great to see, the students advocating, voting, registering to vote, voting, taking us up on the shuttle, even, a lot of interest right now from students asking questions and attending our information sessions. And so I know that you have a lot more deep experience with that than I have, but it's really noticeable. And I don't know if you share that observation.
Yeah, I would second that for sure. I pulled it up recently that we've had 279 people at Lewis University request, assistance from TurboVote, the platform that we partnered with this year to help organize voter registration. So a substantial number of our students have been engaged, and that doesn't even include anybody else who registered to vote, just by going to the Secretary of State's website or, their home, election authority. And it's been a really engaging election. Voter turnout is expected to be the highest voter turnout in 120 years. They're expecting 2/3 of the voter eligible population to have shown up this week. So
Yeah,
that's amazing.
It's incredible. And,
It's not
and
just our students.
exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, we will let you go. We've had you on for longer than we planned, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And again, thank you for everything you've done.
Thanks a lot.
Around this. I know you've been working constantly last couple weeks, and especially the last few days. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you,
I'm
Steve.
ready for a nap.
All right, take care.
So
Thanks a lot.
Quickly, before I'm going to let you introduce our next guest, but we had a question that came in last week that we did not answer, and I want to try to offer the beginning of an answer, and then also ask the student who asked the question. So the question was about, why did we lose 3 weeks of our meal plan that was taken away from us? And that the question was out of context, that I don't know exactly because it was just emailed in. But I think this is what happened. So everybody, all the students, when they signed up and registered in the fall, would have received their 15 weeks, 16 weeks, I think, 15 and a half or 15 and 4 days of meal plan. Then, as the students know, most of our students, not all of our students, but most of our students will be going home at the Thanksgiving break. And therefore, those 3 weeks of meals were subtracted off. There's, if people used an extra meal, so to speak, in another venue, because you could potentially use 4 meal swipes in a day if you ate at 10 o'clock at night, you may feel like you don't have enough meals left because those 3 meals were taken off, but that's because you are going home at Thanksgiving. So I think that's the answer to your question. But if you have follow-up questions on that, you can contact the business office or Sodexo, and they can look into your account specifically and answer that question. So now we're going to move on to kind of what we learned from this semester and what we're going to try to modify and do in terms of the excitement of next semester. I know registration starts in about 10 days, I think, or 8 days. So
starts on November 16th. Students are meeting with their advisors right now. And I just want to say a couple quick things before introducing Dr. Rapp. I know we're a little bit behind schedule. So our COVID-19 numbers are plateauing a little bit or decreasing a little bit as we move into the end of the week, but it has been a time of increase over the last 2 weeks or so. And so I'm just want to again express gratitude to our COVID-19 hotline team who's been working very hard to provide support for our students who are quarantined and isolation. And even though we are probably going to have a much smaller number on that tracker tomorrow when we do our Friday update, it's still a time of great vigilance as we see numbers rise. As our numbers go down a little bit tomorrow, the numbers are still rising in the region and so on. So we urge our community members to continue to be vigilant in all the ways we talk about. I guess maybe want to say one thing, which is that a lot of people have been taking advantage both in our internal community as well as our local community to the Tuesday and Thursday free COVID-19 testing done by Will County. One additional testing will happen this Saturday from the Illinois Department of Public Health, and so that will be if people are finding long lines or long waits in the Tuesday, Thursday sessions, and we didn't do it on this Tuesday because of the election, so there might be a little pent-up demand both in the community and on the campus. There will be a longer, more spread out testing on Saturday. Sunday, November 8th, this weekend. And all of this will be announced in my email that will go out this afternoon. So now we'd like to welcome Dr. Ann Rapp to the program. And we've asked her to come on and talk about the results of 2 surveys that we've done over the past several weeks for students and for faculty, and she has a presentation of some of the results, and then we all can kind of reflect on how we're learning from these results and the longer version of the survey and how that might impact the way we're planning for the spring semester. So Dr. Rapp, welcome, and we'll let you just take it away and get started. Another frequent visitor. This is our frequent visitor today on the conversations from Stritch. So thank you, and if you want to just get started, because I know we're a little behind schedule.
Sure. I think before we jump into the details of the surveys, and we're going to try and give highlights from both the faculty survey and the student survey and make some connections there, I just want to thank everyone who took the time to fill out the survey. I know everyone is busy. I know surveys can be tiring, but the feedback is just really valuable. The other thing is that the sun has gone down and now my living room's a little darker, so I apologize for the light in my room. I'm wondering if we could put up the first slide. Am I supposed to see the slides? Okay, perfect.
Oh, yeah.
So this is based on your feedback, and we're just going to walk through a few of the questions and where the touch points are when it comes to both faculty feedback and student feedback. And then both results of both surveys will be posted on Lewis's website. So you'll be able to see responses to each of the questions and how the community responded to them there. Okay, so the first piece is that this is overwhelmingly positive news from our perspective, both in terms of students and faculty reporting what's working and what they feel good about, and then providing really constructive feedback that we can apply to make improvements in the future, especially as we plan for spring, but even in terms of interventions right now. And the reason why I think that's so incredibly positive about this feedback is the overwhelming, I guess, communication comments from students within this survey that just expressed their gratitude for their faculty, especially in terms of being receptive and supportive and really appreciative of just how difficult these times are and how things happen in life. And, maybe I had to take my quiz at a different time, or I couldn't turn something in on time, or unfortunately I was quarantined, but my professors have been working with me so wonderfully. So that was really wonderful to hear. And it shows that we, our faculty are really living the mission. And I think it's a real expression of the caring that our faculty has for the students. So that was really heartwarming to see that outpouring of gratitude about that as well. The next piece, I think, is also in some ways surprising and also very good news. I think there's an important context to this. What we see is that students, whether they're, and faculty, whether whether they're online or whether they're taking mostly hybrid or whether they're doing a combination of those kinds of modalities, are largely satisfied with their schedules. And you'll see most people, a real majority of people, answered that they strongly agree that they're satisfied with their class schedules. The challenge there is, or the context there, is that everybody recognizes that these are special times. And so there are a variety of different ways we're teaching and learning. And generally speaking, people would really love to get back to normal times. But within the context of the pandemic, people are satisfied with their class schedules. So you can see from these two quotes, exactly, I know it's not possible now to be face-to-face, but you know, I am satisfied. And then I'm doing really well, I'm enjoying my classes, I just miss the human interactions in the live classroom. And I think that we find that with both faculty and students alike. And we'll see more of that as we talk about others of the slides. So this is a really interesting slide. So we wanted to try and get feedback from students in particular about what if conditions changed, or what if we could figure out a way to do more face-to-face teaching within the context of the pandemic. And we were to sort of make a flex in the middle of a semester, or obviously there would be advance notice if we were going to do this, but nevertheless, we wanted to see what students might think about that before we, decided to make any changes. And what the response here to, if it were possible given the pandemic, I'd prefer, Lewis, to shift to mostly face-to-face classes, is a whole variety of responses. We can see that there are a lot of people who would say, yeah, I agree or strongly agree, but almost as many say, no, I'm not so sure about that. And others are on the fence. So, what we think this means is that students need choices, that some people are going to feel comfortable in face-to-face classes and want to have as many of those as they can. And other people, because of loved ones who might be in high-risk groups or other reasons that are personal or professional, really want to be online mostly. So as the spring schedule was designed, we did make sure we built in a lot of choice for students. Mm-hmm. So choice is just really critical. This is another interesting one. And that's, we asked students in a way that was hopefully understandable to them, whether they like learning online more if they have more and regular real-time online sessions with their faculty and fellow students. And we asked faculty a similar question. And you can see here that there is a bit of a spread, but the response really does lean towards a preference of what we call synchronous online learning. So meaning real-time online sessions that are planned in advance and maybe regularly scheduled. And both from students and faculty, we heard that it makes them feel engaged, it makes them feel connected. And then one faculty member said that it's a great opportunity to be inventive and promote active learning. So generally speaking, it seems like people prefer synchronous versus what we would call asynchronous, which is there is no real-time learning. Everyone participates in their own time. Now, the caveat is that that students and faculty both like some independence and flexibility when they're learning online. So the question really is, how do we balance that? In a synchronous online course, what proportion of the learning might be more independent? In an asynchronous, or where there aren't scheduled real-time face-to-face meetings online, how might we schedule some optional opportunities for that? So we're looking at how we can be present for students and faculty so that everyone can maximize that contact that we need in order to feel engaged and learn, and then also maintain the flexibility. It's hard to hit all those bases, but we want to have the best possible teaching and learning experience for our students and faculty as possible.
So let me stop
you
there.
do. I was gonna. You
So
might
that
ask the same
is
thing I was
This
gonna
is
ask.
such an important concept as we're, especially right now, because we're doing registration, people are getting advised. So students now see whether or not a class is synchronous or asynchronous on their schedule, and can make
Yes.
those big choices between those two terms or those two different ways of approaching education. But what you're also saying is that even in the asynchronous environments or in the asynchronous classes, we're also planning for the spring in ways where there will be other ways for students to be engaged with their professors, with each other, through things like chats, I presume, and you might want to just elaborate a little bit about what some of those techniques
so it
are.
could be, it could be office hours. It could be office hours with a particular topic. It could be an opportunity to have a lecture or some kind of delivery of content that could have been in a video in other semesters, possibly in the spring, could be a live session that's recorded. And students who can attend live, and those who perhaps can attend could watch on their own time. So there's just a whole variety of creative ways that that we have the tools to do through Blackboard and the various add-ons that we have.
So, Ann, could I ask another follow-up on that? That you may not know, but just maybe general percentage shifts, if any. So, we had, a fall schedule in which there was a certain percentage. It wasn't exactly this, but almost, a third in terms of kind of fully online, and then some breakup, and I don't know the breakup between asynchronous and synchronous in terms of that third, and then the hybrid, 1 day a week on campus, and then the clinicals primarily and flight that were another group that were in person. Is there any, if there's a shift, what's the biggest shift from the fall to the spring? Is it from, asynchronous to synchronous? Is it from fully online to hybrid, or from hybrid to fully online? Or was there really not much shift that is happening between the fall schedule and the spring schedule in terms of, I know we wanted flexibility so people could choose, but has there been any shifts based on any of this information?
So I totally forgot to review, apologies,
That's all
the
right.
data that I actually sent Dr. Sint yesterday. So he might remember better than I do. My impression is that it's a very similar distribution between the major modalities: online, what we would call traditional, which are labs and those things that absolutely happen in person, and then the hybrid. But that there has been a shift. It isn't a huge shift, but there has been a shift to more synchronous in that online category. So they're still asynchronous, but there are slightly proportionally more synchronous opportunities.
Which is really
And
based
I'm
on this
speaking
research.
specifically to the traditional student population here. For graduate students and adult students, it's a little bit different because of the complicated balancing. Of course, undergraduate students have complicated lives too, but sometimes the graduate and adult students have real difficulty having a real-time session because of work and family.
No, that's great, really helpful. And I guess my point of asking that, having heard a little bit this from Chris earlier, is that, I guess I want the audience to hear that we did this survey and we modified some things in order to address some of the things that we heard in the survey. And I think that's really important, and I appreciate the work you did on that. So, and we can go on to the next slide if
Yeah,
unless-
I don't think I have anything to add to that. That's great.
Okay.
Let's look at the next one.
So this is, these are, in some ways, this is challenging feedback, but I think it's really important to share and to let students know that we are hearing them. There were two themes that kind of came out of reflections on the online learning experience that kind of jumped out at all of us who have been reviewing this feedback. Students feel comfortable in online learning. So that was a really positive piece. The challenges that they did reveal were, one, they want more connection. So that kind of fits with the synchronous learning, right? Sometimes they feel like there's too much independent learning in some online courses. And a phrase that we did see quite a bit was, I feel sometimes like I'm teaching myself. And so, I mean, that, I think, that's challenging, especially, you know, speaking as a person who was a faculty member for 20 years, you know, a certain amount of learning does need to be self-directed. And then we sort of come to class and we process it, come to class online or face-to-face. But I really just want to communicate that we have heard this in terms of students' expressions, and we are constantly working on improving engagement in online courses, whether they're synchronous or asynchronous, and we will continue to do so. So we're hearing you. The second piece is consistency. You know, faculty are creative people, and when a faculty member creates a Blackboard shell, it will often have sort of their stamp and the way that they like to present information. And it's that sometimes can be challenging for students. And we've heard that in the survey results, because each faculty member may have a different way of constructing that Blackboard shell. And every once in a while, it might be difficult to find something that you need. And so I will say that we've been talking about this and we are working on it. So we're really grateful for the feedback, and we're going to be applying it and responding to it.
And really quickly, one quick question. There might be some people watching who don't know, who are not faculty or students, and you might want to just explain what a Blackboard shell is.
Okay, good point. So Blackboard is what's called our learning management system. So it's an online system through which we can have discussions, post materials, create videos and share those. It's basically the online system where the instructional space exists. You can think about it like the classroom, only it's not a physical space. And there are varieties of them, and the one we use is Blackboard. And so every course we have a thing called a shell, and that's essentially like the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then just to reinforce that we're really hearing those comments, and I really appreciate the way that you described, you know, the kind of conversations that you've been a part of with our faculty leadership group around academic preparation, and you know, just I don't want to overcomplicate things, because I think one of the things we want to say is that we're really hearing that message. We're using a lot of different techniques about how to engage students and faculty, or students and students, as you pointed out, and you know, so much about online learning is about engagement and student to student, faculty to student, groups engaging, and just finding all those techniques. And I also want to say one of our main goals here is consistency. So going back to registration, you know, it will say synchronous on the when your people are registering and getting advised. It will be synchronous. It will say asynchronous, and it will be asynchronous. But even with what we're really talking about around what we're learning here is this kind of nuances of what a class is, and the quality that goes on inside of the class, whether it's a hybrid delivery or a online synchronous class or an in-person class. Either we're really learning about what students' lives are like, both in these kind of statistical ways and also in these from these comments that we're seeing trends in. So
yeah, and as students are registering and they're seeing, well, we're not registering yet, but reviewing the schedule,
Yeah.
and they're seeing a class that's online, and it says Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. that is when your class is going to meet. And so, it's good to know, because then you can plan on that, and we want you to be able to count on that. The same happens with a hybrid class, which meets online and face-to-face, so that there's predictability and consistency, and you can count on it.
Great. I think you have a couple more results to share.
Yes, I have a few, and I'll try to go more quickly. So this is hard. Everybody's stressed, and everybody feels like their workload is very heavy. The good news is that people feel like they're managing it. But I think that it's just important for us to hear one another and realize that we're all feeling stressed and a bit overworked. And sometimes it feels like we haven't had a rest since March. And as long as we can just sort of appreciate that and one another's experiences, I think that that's really supportive. But we definitely want to recognize that everyone is feeling this way. So I think we can go on to the next slide. So this slide is about interactivity, and you'll notice a theme here. Interactivity is really, really important. And that's both in terms of learning. And this reports how students feel, if they feel satisfied with the interactivity they have between students and then with their professors. And so you can see that most people agree they are satisfied with the interaction, most students. But we can also see here that there are some students who really want more. And so we are focusing on that and in constantly developing engagement and with students, whatever the learning space may be. The other piece here is social. There's a separate slide for faculty about this because it just is so important in the feedback. If you're in the classroom, you have those conversations with people next to you about how your lunch was and even the weather. And so you interact and you feel connected. That's harder to do when you're in an online course or even in a hybrid course and everyone's wearing masks. So I think it's just important for all of us to keep that in mind and make some special effort to connect. But then it's also on us as a university to create those opportunities for students, whether they're inside the classroom or outside of it. And I should say continue to create those, because there have been a lot of great opportunities during the fall, both to socialize and to participate in classes. So I think we can go to the next slide now. So faculty also feel like they want more connection, especially with colleagues, and they miss the hallway conversations. They miss impromptu socializing, and they miss the support system that they get from interacting with their colleagues, even, obviously to the point of the way it enriches teaching and learning. So I think this is really important for if you combine the feeling stressed and the workload being so much heavier with the fact that we feel disconnected, I think there's a call to create opportunities to facilitate connection. And then if we go to the very last slide, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, just summarizing some ways that we're responding to your feedback. The first piece I've talked about already, which is about offering in the spring schedule a variety of modalities so students and faculty can make choices based on what's right for them. Increasing the proportion of synchronous online courses so that students and faculty can experience more real-time online interaction and feel less isolated. And then looking at asynchronous courses so that we can integrate some face-to-face optional meetings. And then the last bit is this stress and social connection piece. I think we need to look at reducing excessive workloads for everyone in the community. Obviously, we need to do the work. We want to have amazing learning experiences and teaching experiences, but there may be things that maybe can wait, and there may be ways to even reduce work in courses for students, which is a challenging thing because when you're teaching, and I can speak from my own experience, everything is important for students to know. And then the other piece is how do we continue to be more, even, but do it more so, create opportunities for social interaction. And that, I think, will help balance with the stress if we feel more connected. So with that, I'll stop talking for a bit, but I'm happy to chime in if there are questions or other comments.
So I have a lot I want to say, I think, and I'll try to be organized with my thoughts here. So one thing is, before I forget, we are still processing a staff survey. So the Dr. Rapp reported on a faculty-only survey because it was mostly about the classroom experience, but there are similar questions about things like stress and fatigue and other work-life things for staff members that we're going to get feedback on and we can report out on in a future Thursday. So that's sort of out there. We're also going to, in relationship to your last point, Dr. Rapp, we're also surveying students again about kind of the student life and engagement outside of the classroom, social life and so on, and how we can support them through the spring semester. So we'll get more information on that. So I'm just going to bracket those things off a little bit and say, or at least the student experience piece, I think you summarized so well. And I just want to name that we're really talking a lot this week in relationship to employees or our staff and faculty community about doing that very thing that you mentioned, which is how to, at least for the remainder of this year, think about what is our core work, what is our core business, which is essentially, I hope, learning and student success and teaching students. How do we put aside some things and let faculty focus on doing that hard work of teaching in this environment and letting, putting aside some of our longer term goals maybe, or work around things that we're working hard on for that maybe are secondary. And those are really hard conversations to have because, as you say, we wouldn't be doing things unless we thought they were important. And this whole experience is really just so moving in terms of asking us to think about really what's most important and what we can put off. And that's, I just want everyone to know we're really open to opinions about that from our community and to finding ways of making sure people feel proud of the work that we're doing as a university, but also slowing down in some areas that will give people some rest and some ability to be really incredible in the classroom. I don't know if you want to, if you're have any response to that.
I do.
Topic
I
of
think
fatigue, but I know we're hearing it.
I guess I just want to underline. First of all, there's a way in which what we're doing right now, and I'll use this time to say some thank yous and then emphasize what you just mentioned. So we have two students, Reed Poland and Matt Mohan, who are in the studio over and above their normal time of learning, and this is a part of their learning, creating the show. We have two faculty guests, our administrator and faculty guest on here, Dr. Rapp and Dr. Nawara. Two faculty members, Professor Carey, Professor Kilpatrick, that are in the studio making this possible. And while all this is going on, we know that faculty members at home are grabbing a 30-minute dinner between the time that they're trying to produce the next section that they're doing either tonight or tomorrow morning in an online or hybrid fashion. And then, of course, all of the rest of our staff who are doing such great work. We are an organization that's focused on student learning. Dr. Rapp has done a great job of saying we want to learn as an organization. That's why we do these surveys to learn from our community about how we can create an environment in which our students can even learn in a better environment, given all the pressures and chaos that's going on around us. But it's really about thanking all of you and also asking you, because we want to be a place where people really feel valued, to take care of yourselves. This is a really delicate balance between what you're trying to do to either learn or to create an opportunity for students to learn. But it's also an opportunity in which we have to kind of put this in the long haul, because it's really important that we take care of ourselves and take care of each other. If I can mention one thing that's in here, so grateful to our people who are still working on the Flyer to Flyer program, in which some of our employees are reaching out to students, seeing how they're doing. But I would just say part of this survey says we as employees need each other to reach out to each other and just say, how are you doing? I know this is hard and stressful. I hope you're doing well. I care about you. I miss you. We used to have lunch together and now I don't see you. That's a part of who we are as a community at Lewis, and we need to make sure that we reach out to each other and both thank each other, but also say, how are you doing? And I hope you're doing well. So I'll leave my comments there.
No, I'm good.
All right,
Okay.
so we'll call it a night. I know there's many other things going on in the world, including I just heard from our producer, Ray Kennelly, that the President Trump is having a news conference starting at 5:30. So we'll have you switch channels and you can go to that. But I just want to say how grateful we are, and ask that you take care of yourself and those that you love. God bless y'all.